Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Dr. Jeremy Kuzmarov. He of the great Covert Action magazine. We're going to talk about the Skripals. With everything going on in Alaska, we're going to talk about the Skripals. We're going to some of the new revelations in Russiagate. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. And just in case you weren't aware of one of the best sites on the internet, let me hip you to it right now. It is CovertActionMagazine.com. It was started by a former CIA worker who a while back got really unhappy with some of the miscreant activity that he had been involved in and decided he was going to turn over a new leaf and start blowing some whistles. And there we go. With its former president gone, will the Southern Poverty Law Center return to its roots as genuine civil rights watchdog? I used to think it was great, and I found out bit by watching it that, boy, they sure went along with a lot of the mainstream narratives, and I got very, very suspicious of the Southern Poverty Law Center. All kinds of stuff. Trump's targeting D.C., oh, you name it. So we got lots of stuff. One thing, Jeremy, let me show you something that has me suspicious, okay? You tell me, since we're talking about, let's see, let's do this. Let's do this before we get started, right? Okay, a lot of times when they're up to no good, what they'll do is they'll throw, some distraction out, whatever the case may be, and we'll get so tied up looking at this shiny object that we will not see what's going on, right? Let me show you something. Okay, so everybody's like, oh my God, they're going to have the National Guard running the street. And for the activist people, I can understand. And, that, hey, we don't want the whole posse comitatus thing. Fair enough. At something that's reasonable that I would expect people to be upset about. But at the same time, there's a story that seems to have slipped under. And it's very, very similar, which leads me to believe that this is a distraction. Look at this. Look at this. Pentagon planning quick reaction force for civil disturbances. The Trump administration is looking at plans to set up a 600-person National Guard quick reaction force. The Washington to quickly deploy to U.S. cities to quell protests and other unrest, the Washington Post reported Tuesday. Internal Pentagon documents reviewed by the Post lay out the parameters for, listen to this, a domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force, calling for hundreds of Guard members, hundreds, tens of thousands, I'm betting, outfitted with weapons and riot gear to be on constant standby and deployable in as little as 1 hour. It's almost like they're expecting civil unrest and protests, and they're setting it up. The proposal, if enacted, would be so they get on to Trump's views. Yeah, President Trump, all right. The documents reported by the Post, National Guard, as late as July and August, as early as August, lay out a plan in which troops would be split into two groups stationed at military bases in Alabama and Arizona. The proposal contains discussions about the societal implications in setting up such a program, budget reaction, which is hundreds of millions of dollars if military aircraft are needed to be ready at all times. Ask about documents. A defense official appeared to acknowledge that such plans existed, but declined to comment. We will not discuss these plans through leaked documents, pre-decisional or otherwise. So here's my point. As everybody gets all freaked out about these, documents or whatever, these National Guard troops, they're seemingly setting up something in case protests or riots. Why would people protest or riot? Let's see, you could have an economic meltdown. You could have people upset about wars and or genocides as the fall comes and students go back. Do you see what I'm saying? Am I being overly suspicious, or does this look like they're up to no good again, Jeremy?
Well, absolutely. They're up to no good. We know that. They've been up to no good for many, many years. And we know who they whose interests they represent. And I mean, it could be, it's part of the strategy of tension. They may be encouraging protests. I mean, they're carrying out over the top policies that are inevitably going to engender protests. I mean, the ICE raids, for instance, you have masked men kidnapping people. A lot of them are actually, excuse me, legal residents. They're claiming they're gang members just because they had a tattoo. They're sending them to, the Everglades, Alcatraz, and brutal torture chamber in El Salvador. I mean, I think they would expect, and that may be what they want. It's been a strategy of tension, divide and conquer. I mean, they want like civil unrest, and that's the environment they can ram through more and more police state measures, more and more draconian economic policies. I mean, the big, beautiful bill, if you study it, I mean, it's huge tax giveaways to the wealthy. They're pushing the military budget over $1 trillion. I mean, that should be the focus of protest. But a lot of people, I mean, for good reason, are focused on what you're saying, the genocide in Gaza, the ICE. I mean, you pick your poison. There's so many horrible things. But yeah, I think they want people fighting each other, and then they can continue to ram through stuff like Big Beautiful, and more police state measure, because they can say, oh, look at these protests, and they demonize the protester, they call them terrorists, and then people are on edge. I think people become panicky. They're scared to go in the downtown. They're scared to go out, so they're actually going to support these kind of draconian thing you're describing, where there's more and more of a police state. And I mean, the threat of fascism becomes more and more real. I mean, we've been moving toward a fascistic state for a long time, and this is just kind of out in the open.
And the other thing is this. So the Pentagon does this, and here's what they do. They put on it, Trump's doing this. So guess what? So all the liberals are mad because Trump's doing it. And then if you're a so-called Trump supporter or whatever, then you're supposed to support it because Trump's doing it. You know what I mean? Instead of saying the government's doing this, the Pentagon's doing that, they change it to a name, Trump's doing that, which puts people into camps. So they don't see, hey, wait, the hell are they building up these forces for riots and protests? Protests are legal. What do you, for protests, I can go out and protest that weed ain't legal or something tomorrow. I can go out and protest that the price of water is too high. Anything I want, I can protest, and it's protected speech. And they're literally saying, we're going to put together a military convenement for protests for First Amendment protected speech. And people aren't saying, no, you really can't do that. Protests are perfectly legal. They don't just say riots. Riots, we may not like it, but legally they could do it. But they say protests and riots. Literally, they're telling you, for protected speech, we'll go after you. We're going to use military force. And here's my question. For the last 25 years, they have been giving the police tanks. They've been justifying, well, the police have to be prepared for terrorism and riots and protests. So they're giving the police riots gear. They're fully militarizing the police. And all of us that says, hey, it's a little suspicious. I was a police officer. I saw it, right? Yeah, they sure are militarizing the police. This seems kind of weird, right? Okay, fair enough. You're militarizing the police. And now you come out and say, all right, we're going to actually use the actual military. Well, what the hell have you been militarizing the police for? Supposedly for this specific thing. And now you say, nah, we just use the military itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's this trend toward, open fascistic state where you have this massive, monstrous military apparatus, of which the police, are essentially integrated. I mean, they've been getting military equipment, in the Pentagon 1033 program, and that goes back, as you say, it goes back, I think to the Clinton years, and it's really not a partisan issue. I think you're right. They spin it a partisan issue. Oh, look, Trump's doing this, but really every president's been doing this for the last 30 to 40 years. And it's this, these structural forces that control. I think they divert people from the structural forces that have taken control of the U.S. government, the oligarchic capitalist forces. And Trump is just an instrument of them. And he's a particularly effective one because he does what they want. He riles people up and he divides people. And that's exactly what they want, because what they don't want is what was developing in the 60s, that Martin Luther King was building an interracial coalition of working and middle class people who want to recalibrate the American government, transform it in a more humanistic direction, divert resources from the military to social programs, redistribute wealth. And that's what they don't want. So they take elaborate measures. And Trump's a perfect instrument because he divides people along partisan lines. And then liberals mock his supporters, who may be some working class whites. And the King goal. And that's why when they talk about Martin Luther King, they usually only focus on the early phase of his career, fighting segregation. But once that's achieved, it's rarely talked about much how he was trying to build a much broader movement to change government in America and change society. And he had to be murdered for that.
Yeah, that's a fact. Oh, that absolutely. I'll say one other thing, and that is the way they divide. It's funny because the whole ICE thing, right? It's like they get you accustomed to masked men grabbing people off the street. As you said, if they grab people who are like citizens, who don't even have an accident. I thought about the other day, they could walk up to me and say, "Hey, Garland, let me see your green card." And I go, "Huh? Wait, what?" And they could grab me and take me away and just say, "Oh, well, we thought he was, we thought he was whatever, a foreigner, so we took him away." And
who carries their green card on them? If you have because I was Canadian, then I became an American citizen. For 10 years, I had a green card. I didn't carry it on me every day. I stored it, safely in my home. So if somebody stopped me, I wouldn't be carrying it.
The funny thing is, Trump said, "Okay, I'm going to do something about immigration." And like 3.5 months after he got elected, he said, "Well, I heard from some of my business friends," meaning rich oligarchs, "and they said, we need these people to pick this and some of these jobs that's going to hurt our country." He said, "So I'm going to back up under special areas." In other words, what he was saying is this: I ain't doing it. Never. The truth is, he was never playing. What he basically said was, "Look, I said I was going to do this big immigration thing and get rid of all these immigration people who are immigrants. But as people like you and I already knew, they're picking fruit and doing cleaning hotel rooms and doing all of these things that the rich people don't want to pay people a reasonable salary for. So they're paying the illegal immigrants under the table, cash, no taxes, no nothing. And they're paying them less money. And when supposedly they called Trump, Trump already knew this before he got elected. The whole thing was a scam. It was a fraud. And so instead of, now that he's not going to really do that big immigrant sweep that he announced, and then he kind of quietly announced that he wasn't going to do it. So now all they do is this: performative. They send some guys on the street and they nab a bunch of guys. And it gets a lot of news. And it looks like it's a big sweep because they nabbed 12 guys on the freaking street somewhere, right? And it looks like it was big, but it wasn't really. It was just 12 guys got nabbed. And you think, "Oh, wow, they're nabbing immigrants." No, they're not. They nabbed 12 guys. The judge probably made them let them go anyway. But also, we get accustomed to a bunch of guys jumping out with mass grabbing people, pulling them away. So when that starts to happen more regularly, and let's say they're not immigrants, we're already warmed up to it, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. And then, that diverts from what they're doing with the big, beautiful bill and the channeling wealth more and more upward and passing taxation laws that benefit the super wealthy, benefit pushing the military budget. And there's no protest over that because, as you say, this is all performative. And they want to divert. I guess they would rather people protest that than mobilize together against the agenda of the government and direction it's been moving.
So let's talk about lies and scams. This is one of the big ones. The Skripal's poisoning, right? Clearly an MI6 deception. I've always put the Skripals like this. The Skripal story that they were poisoned by one of the most deadly poisons ever known to man that kills you in like 30 seconds. They then went to a pizza parlor. We got a problem right there, where they hung out for 4 hours. They then decided to go down to the sit in the park and feed the ducks, where they simultaneously collapsed and started frothing at the mouth. That would be like saying, Garland and Jeremy were kind of hanging out one day, and both of them got shot between the eyes with a shotgun. They then decided to get some pizza. They had pizza for a while. And then they went and decided to see a movie. And while sitting in the movie, they both collapsed from their wounds. That's how much sense that makes. But that's what they went with. And the media never asked the obvious question: how do you survive a poison that kills you in 30 seconds for 4 hours? Jeremy.
Well, and I was reading over the article before, and there's the statistic: 65% of the British public believe that ridiculous story you were saying. So, and I mean, British people are well educated and sophisticated and intelligent in general, but when it comes to this kind of stuff, I think they're very quick to believe the Russian did it narrative, and they don't think deeply about it. And maybe people sometimes just kind of are busy and they're just flipping through the paper and they see the headline and they see something about Russia and they just kind of nod their head and move on. They don't really look, maybe read the full article or look, deeply or think too deeply about it because, as you say, the story just makes no sense at all. And other aspects of the story, a detective, because allegedly, I think the Novichok was planted in their home, according to the British story. But then there was a police detective who went there and examined the doorknob, and he had no protective equipment, and he had nothing, no illness. And I mean, if it was really Novichok, he would have been, because any exposure, it's one of the deadliest toxins. He would have been gone in seconds. But it was a clear disinformation. I mean, with the ducks, as you say, the CIA, spread stories. And Gina Haspel, the CIA director, that ducks had died from the Novichok. But then, the article I wrote was based on a book. It was kind of a review of a book by John Helmer, who's I think he's an Australian journalist who works he's one of the few Westerners who's he's lived in Moscow for years, and he actually reports in Russia, and which we don't get that. I mean, the only reporting we have from Moscow is like the New York Times maybe has somebody, or Washington Post, but they're totally biased and unreliable. So he's really a very good source, and he did a real deep dive into this case, and he showed all kinds of anomalies about it, including they made this story up about this woman who really died of a drug overdose, and they claimed somehow she had picked up a perfume bottle, I think in a garbage or something, and that she was a victim of the Novichok poisoning. But the autopsy found a mix of like fentanyl, cocaine, and she and her boyfriend were known to be in the drug underground. And the boyfriend was very evasive, told all kinds of different stories. He was paraded in the media after, and he told all kinds of different stories, and he was not a reliable source. So that was one facet of it. But yeah, I mean, they were discovered on this bench, coincidence, by like a top person in the British military. It wasn't just like a regular person found in the park. It happened to be a very high level person in the military.
Was
And
was it a nurse? Was it a woman who was a nurse or something?
Yeah, but she was pretty high in the British military, and they were in Salisbury, England. It just happened to be near the Porton Downs, where the British have a chemical weapon manufacturer, Novichok. And the British Prime Minister at the time was Theresa May, was claiming that only Russians can make this poison, and meanwhile, down the street there's a major facility where the British manufacture it, and it's come out that they had the capability. But I mean, this had major implication. The case is so significant because it has major ramifications as far as foreign policy and the conflict we've seen unfolding in Ukraine and with Russia, because it was used to demonize Russia further in the U.S. and Western, British media. It was used to further ratchet up sanctions on Russia and to justify, arming the Ukrainians to the teeth in basically carrying out the war by proxy against Russia. So it's really deadly war propaganda. And I mean, the Skripals are victim because it looked like they were clearly killed. Nobody's heard from them for a decade now. And it looks like, and the official story also didn't make sense because they made it seem like, because there's this guy, the victim, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter. He was made out to be this like high-level defector from the Russian intelligence service who was going to expose all kinds of corrupt practices by Putin. But actually, he had defected years earlier. So he knew, Helmer points out that he would have known almost nothing and had no tangible information to give. And Putin, this was like before the World Cup was held in Moscow. Like Putin would not murder somebody and risk, diplomatic row right before the World Cup. But also Helmer believes that Skripal was actually a triple agent, that he was still working for the Russians and that he had infiltrated the Porton Downs. And that's why British intelligence targeted him, because he knew all the secrets about the British Novichok production facility and chemical and biological warfare programs. And he was a threat to expose that. So they killed him and then tried to blame the Russians and further advance their anti-Russia foreign policy agenda.
Yeah, I mean, we're supposed to be stupid and say, gee, Novichok poisoning occurred just a few miles from one of the only places in the world that you can find Novichok. When I did my, which is on my Substack, my investigation into the origins of COVID, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. The lab, one of the labs that works with COVID is in Frederick, Maryland. And they had a leak, a weird shutdown and all this stuff. And within a few weeks, there was not far from there were these two old folks homes, these two old care homes, nursing homes that had a strange viral outbreak in the middle of the summer, a respiratory virus outbreak in the middle of the summer that killed a bunch of people. Boom, just like that, right after a shutdown. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's weird. It's close. These two things are close by, almost like they're related,
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times, the timeline is interesting, but the locations are very, very interesting too. And I remember that you got a picture of these two guys. These are the so-called Russian agents, right? But I remember following this up and finding out a couple of things. Originally, they said these two guys were involved. The original story was their plane landed in Heathrow at 9:30. But at 9 a.m., they actually put the that's when they put the Novichok on the doorknob. They actually put the Novichok, according to the original story, they put the Novichok on the doorknob a half hour before they landed. Then, if that ain't bad enough, these guys stayed at a hotel where they were smoking weed and having parties and bringing girls over and all of this stuff, right? And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like what agents and assassins do. Like they're going to bring attention to themselves. What kind of agents and assassins? If they really did this, they would have stealthily come in. They would have had a safe house to stay. You'd never know. None of it makes sense. So they're coming in and they're partying, smoking weed, it sounds like what two young guys would do that were traveling to have fun. But it doesn't makes no. I'm supposed to believe that the Russian intelligence is so incompetent that these guys are partying and smoking weed with girls to bring attention. The cops somebody could have called the cops. Weed's not legal in England. And I'm like, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, they are very professional, the Russian intelligence services. So that's ridiculous. And I mean, we see the pattern, at the end of the article, I mentioned the Navalny case. That was another fake poisoning to demonize the Russians. And there was no evidence. They claimed Navalny sipped some tea or something, and he got sick. But then he went to a hospital and in Russia, and the doctor said, dismissed the idea that he had been poisoned. And then they sent him to Germany, allegedly for further treatment. And then the Germans all of a sudden said he had been poisoned. But again, it's the same thing. You have this deadly poison that's supposed to kill people instantly, and he's not dying. And the original doctor, and that was the same in the Skripal case. A doctor came out, the doctor who treated Sergei and Yulia said it was not Novichok poisoning. There were other symptoms, likely from the British having poisoned them, but not with Novichok. So they use this just to stir up this anti-Russia fervor that's been going on for well over a decade now. And the goal has been to recreate the climate of the Cold War, and that served the elite agenda in numerous ways, including it's a way to ramp up the military budget, like what I was describing. Now it's eclipsed a trillion, and you have to have a bogeyman, a bad guy who's so evil that you have to spend all this money on the military. So you have to create these fake stories to instill in the public the idea that the Russians are really evil and a real threat. So that's the technique they use. They've been doing it for decades and decades now, and unfortunately they get away with it. More people need to inform themselves of what's going on, and there's a failing of the education, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, well,
Education.
the Navalny issue was interesting because they said, all right, Navalny's been poisoned and with Novichok, and here's what happened. He was in the airport and it was put in his tea. And the Russian says, great, well, we have lots of things that we can check there. We got, cameras, and we can test the area. And then the NATO people said, well, no, come to think of it, it was put in water bottles. And somebody snuck the water bottles out of the country, and we have the water bottles in England. And Russian says, okay, well, let me see the water bottles. And they said, well, now that you mention it, what actually happened was they took it and rubbed it on the inside of his underwear. And it's like, it was in his tea, then it was in water bottles, and you had the water bottles. And then it was his underwear. What's the next? You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, okay, you have had 3 different stories, and it was in water bottles, and you told us you had the water bottles, and when asked for the water bottles, it wasn't water bottles anymore. So to me, it's so blatantly obvious. You just change water bottles, tea, maybe underwear. Who cares? The Russians did it. That's the way it sounds to me.
Well, absolutely. They keep changing the story, and again, this is supposed to be the deadliest of poisons. So he's not going to survive if it's actually a Novichok attack. And it reminds me, and you see the parallels. It reminds me of the Syrian chemical gas attacks. There are photos that Assad allegedly carried out chemical attacks against his own people and sarin gas. But then they also had, photos of rescue workers with no protective equipment who would have fallen immediately dead. And then, like the scene in that case, it was staged. Like they had a dead goat, but then there were no foot marks. So how did the goat get there? And it was clear somebody brought him there, and they staged the scene. So they're staging these incidents. And, they made Navalny out to be some kind of hero when videos emerge on the internet of him in these racist neo-Nazi videos calling immigrants cockroaches and celebrating Nazis. And he had embezzled money from various organizations. Him and his brother were involved in a mail fraud scheme that landed him in prison in the first place. And he embezzled money, I think, from one of the political organizations he was part of. And he had a regressive worldview that would have, compromised Russian interests. Like he wanted to basically balkanize the country. And no wonder he had support of about 1% of Russians but that, he was made into this hero, and this there was an Emmy or Academy Award winning movie about him, and he was made like he was Nelson Mandela, and that's the magic of propaganda. And these intelligence agencies, working in collaboration with the media, have perfected the art of propaganda, and they hoodwink a huge percentage of the public. We have to be honest that these, as stupid as some of these stories are, especially the people like us who have studied the history and know the kind of techniques they use, but it works for most people because, again, I think they don't read these stories carefully. They just see a headline, or they see something in Britain, maybe a short report on BBC, or they're flipping and they watch CNN and they see, oh, Russian poison this guy, and then they flip the channel. So it's in their head. The Russians did this terrible thing again, and they've grown up on a diet of Hollywood movies where the KGB are the bad guys, and they weren't properly educated in their schools. They didn't really learn the real history of the Cold War. They were just told that the Soviet Union was evil and Stalin was a monster. So unfortunately, it works. And as educators and alternative media, we try and educate people and build a movement of opposition to that culture.
Well, in case people think that I was exaggerating, I'm going to help you out here. Watch this. Here's the first story. Putin foe picture drinking poison tea as waiter who served him vanishes, right? So Navalny was poisoned with tea, and the evil person who poisoned him, who was clearly a Russian agent, disappeared, right? All right, well, let's go here. So, boy, we see it with poison tea, and poor old Navalny, poison tea. But oh, wait a minute. Alexei Navalny's team says Novichok agent found on hotel room water bottle, not airport tea. There we go. And look, we've got there's Navalny, and there are smiling women and blah, blah, blah. The nerve agent used to poison Russian opposition leader was detected on an empty water bottle from his hotel room in the Siberian city of Tomsk, right? There we go. Listen to this. A video posted on Navalny's Instagram account showed members of his team searching the hotel, the room he had just left in the Xander Hotel, an hour after they learned he had fallen sick in suspicious circumstances. It was decided to gather up everything. There we go. Water bottles, you name it. His team was wearing protective gloves or seen placing items in a listen to this. 2 weeks later, a German laboratory found traces of Novichok precisely on the bottle of water from the Tomsk hotel room, which would have killed everybody. If there was any on that water bottle, it would have killed everybody. But so now we know definitively that it wasn't tea. It was a water bottle, and the traces were found on it, right? Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Not quite. The saga continues. Navalny's underpants smeared with poison, would-be assassin reveals. So it was tea, because we saw pictures of that. Then they actually had the bottles, and German laboratories had tested the bottles and found Novichok. Oh, wait, underwear. A Russian agent involved in the cleanup of the near-fatal nerve agent poison of Alexander has revealed an inadvertent confession. That's the worst kind. How the Russian activist's underpants were smeared with the toxin Novichok. So they actually had bottles. They had the bottles, but that wasn't good enough. How do you have bottles and you test them and you say, we got it. Our laboratories have shown it. Oh, wait a minute. Never mind. They smeared it on his underpants. But what about the tea? You had pictures of him drinking the poison tea, and the waitress disappeared, and then the under bottles, and then
And how did you get on the underpants? Somebody snuck into his room and took it from the tea and smeared it and went into his drawer while he was sleeping.
Brother, yeah, exactly. You see what I'm saying? If you look into the story, and I've said this, if Trump really was pissed at or wanted to corner the Russians, all he'd have to do is say, I'm going to London, come to London and bring Tulsi Gabbard and say, look, if something critical, I need to talk to the Skripals as soon as possible. Well, they're not here. Get them on the phone.
Yeah,
You
where
need
are
a
they?
medium to talk to the Skripals at this point. They ain't alive. They will never be seen again. Their bodies have been thrown into a vat of acid and put on a, you know what I mean, and scattered to the wind somewhere. They're done. They're history. They would have to come up with a story and say, well, they died in a plane crash. Oh, they don't want to be seen. You know what I mean? It's obvious. But you look at these, they're not even as good as the original Cold War stories. Now, three different stories.
Yeah. Well, and the book I wrote and published in 2018 was called "The First Cold War is Tragedy, the Second is Farce," because this is just a pure farce, and they assume lack of critical thinking skills. But again, the numbers I was seeing were disturbing. That 65% of the British public did feel that the Russians were culpable in the Skripal killing. I don't know the numbers for Americans, but it may be equivalent. So, uh, unfortunately, this works, even though it is ridiculous when you look into it for just a few minutes. And that's often what I find in a lot of these stories, like, at the Kennedy assassination, both JFK and Robert Kennedy. You look into it just for a few minutes, or read one book, and that points out certain things, and it makes no sense. Or 9/11, you know, the story just makes no sense. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that, but the techniques of propaganda, and again, a lot of people who fall for it are not stupid. Just in these areas, they've been conditioned to think certain ways, I think.
There's a book that I always tell people that is important to read, and it's called The Confidence Game. Why people fall for it, why it works every time. You right? And they talk about, and one of the things they talk about is this. During the Bush, when AIDS was big in the 80s, this guy said, I've got AIDS and I'm dying. I only got a year or two to live, whatever. And I'm going to start this, raise funds for AIDS and all this stuff, right? He didn't have AIDS. He didn't have anything. And he started this organization, and it got so big. He had this big gala, and Barbara Bush, the president's wife, came to it, and all these celebrities were following. They're like, oh, this poor guy. And so he raised like millions of dollars. The whole thing was a lie. And basically what they said is this. Why did it work? Because the lie was so big that nobody would believe that anybody would tell a lie that big. When the government comes out and says the Skripals, whatever, they were poisoned and this and that, and you and I look at it with a skeptical eye and say, but your story makes no sense. And we say to people, their story makes no sense because the lie is so big. They're like, I'm supposed to believe that the government, the government would tell us that lie? No. And they don't know the history of the government lie. So one of the reasons that it works is because the bigger a lie, you tell a gigantic lie, and then people will be like, nah, that nobody go that far. And I think that when you look at these lies, they've gone so far that when we look at it, we say they're absurd, and people, they won't pick it apart because of the context. It came from the government. It's a big, major, gigantic incident. And if I believe this, it deconstructs everything that I believe about this society, this government, and this country. So I can't believe anything that they tell me a lie that big, because if they tell me a lie that big, then everything's a lie, which in fact it is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's also the Goebbels technique is very effective. Joseph Goebbels, who actually he was a Nazi propaganda minister, and he actually said he drew his techniques from Woodrow Wilson and the committee in World War I. Woodrow Wilson set up this huge committee on public information to basically condition the American public to support U.S. involvement in World War I. When they had been initially, when the war broke out in Europe, most of the public was against any American involvement in that war. And it was an elaborate propaganda apparatus to demonize the Germans. And Goebbels studied how that was done because American public opinion shifted very rapidly. And people took retribution on German Americans who had been very well integrated into American life and a very successful immigrant group as far as education and professional levels. And all of a sudden you had attacks because the propaganda agency stirred up hatred for Germany and it demonized the German Kaiser. there were attacks and lynchings targeting German Americans. So Goebbels studied that, and the CPI employed some top psychological experts, including Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, who I think later went to work for the CIA. And Goebbels studied that, and he said, the key to is to repeat the big lie over and over again, and people start to believe it. So with the Russian, that's what they do over and over every day. The Russians did this, the Russians did that, and people just don't think twice. So to add to what you're saying, I think that's part of the technique as well, and it works, unfortunately.
One of the things that you bring up here, and I think it's important. Let's go back to this story, and this is the Skripal story. You bring up Operation Mincemeat. That there was an MI6 operation. If you could let people know what that was.
Yeah, that was they dressed. They dressed up somebody who was actually just a regular person. I think he was Irish, who died, and they had his corpse in the morgue. But they dressed him up in a British Army uniform and gave him a very high-ranking insignia, and they strategically placed him where German soldiers would find him, and they planted disinformation, in his pocket. That supposedly revealed British battle plans. So it was designed to throw the Germans off. Then they attacked somewhere else. So they've used these methods of deception and disinformation, and they're pretty skilled at doing it. Even though you're right, this operation looks somewhat crude. The Skripal one and the Navalny operations, they do look somewhat crude. In the past, they have had some pretty sophisticated operations.
Yeah, and what we see is more often than not these false flag type operations. They're behind. There's a what is, as soon as I can remember it in Zen. There's a famous saying where a guy sees a goat and the Zen master says to him, what background do you see the goat? And he says, the background of the grass. What background do you on what background do you see the grass? Well, the background of that house. On what background do you see the house? On the background of the hills. He keeps going. On what background do you see the hills? On the background of the sky. And he finally says, and on what background do you see the sky? And the guy looks at it, looks around, and he thinks, and he goes, on the background of the mind, of consciousness, right? Okay. When you see the Skripal poisoning, right? On what background? And you and I say, hey, that makes no sense if you take it apart, because we're not putting it in a context other than the context of misleading the public. But if you're seeing it on the context of movies where every Russian guy is the bad guy, on the context of story after story where Putin's killing everybody, beating them to death with his bare hands, and he's an evil cage. You know what I mean? If the background that you're given is Russia's bad, Russia's evil, Putin poisoned Litvinenko, and he poisoned basically what they're like, he poisons anybody he doesn't like or his enemies or he kills everybody. So you get this background that says Putin's in there's no Russia. It's just Putin, and he's evil, and he kills everybody for no reason and goes like evil people do. As soon as you hear Putin poisoned, you don't need to hear anymore. Just put any generic name in there. So it's the background that they give you in Hollywood or whatever that says evil Russians poison and kill people. All they got to do is give you the most cockamamie story in the world, and you're already set from it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a process of conditioning. And I think, Hollywood is very crucial, since a lot of people develop their worldview these days from the movies. Hollywood has been one of the most effective propaganda instruments for the U.S. government, largely because people don't think that they're being fed propaganda. They think they're being entertained. And so it's that subtlety that makes it so effective as propaganda. I've done articles discussing how, the CIA set up liaison offices, especially with Hollywood director, Hollywood, especially in the 70s. There were a couple critical movies that came out. Like Costas Gavras was a director who made some critical movies about the CIA in Chile and I think Greece. And there were various revelations in that period. So the CIA had to get smart, and they set up this liaison office, and they basically penetrated Hollywood, and now they vet the scripts. And directors, from my understanding, Oliver Stone cannot make movies anymore. He's mainly doing like political documentaries these days. He was in the 80s, and they always gave him a hard time, and he was able to get through with some critical films in the 80s, but things have changed since that time. And the CIA and Pentagon have their own liaison offices, and they're able to vet most scripts in the major studios, and more iconoclastic directors like Oliver Stone are kind of blacklisted these days. So I think that's a very key toolkit in the whole propaganda apparatus, and it's very subtle because if it was overt, crude propaganda, then people would recognize it. But the subtlety is what results in its effectiveness. And then the media, there's the illusion of an independent media, but like those articles you're showing was pretty crude yellow journalism, where they're not, carrying out professional journalistic practices of trying to verify sources, get both sides of a story, critically, scrutinize government proclamation. They're not doing that, and it's very, very sensational and Russophobic. Like, there's this backdrop of these evil Russians, and Russia is this dark place.
Well, here's a perfect example if you want to understand how they do this propaganda. I like to bring this up to people. This guy, Evgeny Mikhail Avnievsky, right? He is an Israeli American. There you go. Citizenship, United States, State of Israel. Born in Russia, right? Born in the Soviet Union, to a Russian Jewish family. Became an Israeli citizen and served in the IDF. As he became in the film industry evolved, he relocated to Los Angeles, and he's openly gay. So this is what we know about. This is all the things that we know about this guy, right? He fits the profile. He is a dissident Russian, right? He is an Israeli citizen. He served in the IDF, and he made 2 big movies, right? Oh, by the way, Academy Award and Emmy for his documentary Winter on Fire. Well, what is that? What's his name that you just mentioned made a movie called Ukraine on Fire, right?
Yeah, Oliver Stone. Yeah,
Oliver Stone made this movie called Ukraine on Fire that talked about, explained all of the bad stuff and all that was going on in Ukraine. So this guy immediately, I'm sure CIA, paid for it. He made a movie called Winter on Fire. And if you go searching and you search Ukraine on Fire, more often than not, what will pop up is Winter on Fire. Notice this: Ukraine on Fire, Winter on Fire, or Ukraine Winter Fire, right? They make the same thing, and then when you go to search, they switch it and put that one in. But he made one other movie, and guess what it was called? Cries from Syria, about how bad Assad was, and the white helmets were the good guys in this movie, and all this kind of stuff, right? So this guy, an IDF, former IDF guy, he makes propaganda movies, one of which being is pro-Ukraine and is made to push back against the Oliver Stone. The other, and replace it basically in your search bar. And the other one is an anti-Assad Syria pro white helmets crap that also gets awards. So you know what I mean? So if
they always get the awards, because I don't know if we discussed on this show though, this series on Netflix that just won an Emmy, The Octopus Murders, that covered up a CIA murder of a journalist, Danny Casolaro, who had exposed corruption in the CIA. And this film suggested he committed suicide and that he had failed to uncover anything valuable and was depressed. But actually, he had uncovered huge information about CIA corruption and was headed to Australia to meet with the members of the Australian Parliament about the Nugan Bank, their investigation into the CIA's Nugan Bank, which was a CIA money laundering front they set up in Australia, and he had a huge amount of information about that. So the Netflix series, The Octopus Murder, was a complete fraud, and they won the Emmy. So it's sad.
That's a way to know that it's like an intelligence bullcrap operation when they start getting all of these awards.
Yeah.
And when they get awards, and it's about either foreign policy or intelligence. If it's
Yeah.
about foreign policy or intelligence, and they get Emmys and all these other
Yeah.
kind of awards,
Yeah.
you need to start looking. Because when I saw The Winter on Fire, I said, I wonder who directed that movie. And I found this guy, Abnievsky, and I said, any other movies?
Yeah. I'm
Interesting.
gonna. What's his name? I'm gonna. Can you repeat his name? I'm gonna do an article on that.
Let me share the screen again. That's it. It's Evgeny Abnievsky.
Okay.
Yep. Israeli-American film director, Academy Award, born in the USSR. Early Israeli and American works, right? He participated in the Black Sea by the USSR Pioneer Camp in Orleanic. Well, if it was the Pioneer Camp, that was probably so whatchamacallit. In Israel, he directed TV series Days of Love, Crime and Punishment, Death Game, blah, 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 Return from India. He received awards there. Documentaries on Ukraine and Syria. Oh, look, he was awarded listen to this, Friend of the Free Press Trophy by the Los Angeles Press Club for his work on crimes from Syria. He was named the best director at the annual Critics' Choice Documentary Awards in New York. The Producers Guild named Cries from Syria among the nominees for the Outstanding Producer of Documentary Motion Pictures. Best Song in a Document for Prayers for This World, performed by Cher. Best Documentary Feature for 27, International Documentary Association Courage Under Fire Award. The Overseas Press Club's Peter Jennings Award, right? So the bottom line is, so there we go. He also did a documentary, Francesco, a segment of the documentary regards to homosexuality in the Catholic Church. So, this guy,
well, they build his credential as something legitimate, and then they use him to do these hatchet films.
Exactly. Ukraine fight for freedom, So the bottom line is this: he is a deep state operative, nothing more, nothing less. That's what he is, and it's exactly what we said. There's a new, I don't remember what it is. There's a new show, and it is a husband and wife. Have you seen that?
No.
And they are spies. I keep seeing the new series, True Lies. No, there's a new one coming out, and the husband and wife are spies. I can't think of the name of it.
In the past, they've had Homeland, that was made by the CIA. It was Obama's favorite show, and they had one with Jennifer Garner, Alias. That was part of, and her husband Ben Affleck admitted that he was very close with the CIA and had been given tours of the CIA, and he was in some pro-CIA movies. So these are past examples of how the CIA was trying to burnish its image, because they got some bad media in the 70s, and they learned from that they have to use the media to condition the public to make it believe that they're honorable people who serve in that agency.
Let me see, what do we got? You've got, let me see something.
And I'll check out this new series if you know what it's called.
I don't see it. The bottom line is one of the women from the West Wing admitted that on the Covert show, she admitted that the head writer and some of the other writers were former CIA. And the head writer, she says, oh, he's former CIA, and his father was in the CIA too. And then she says, oh yeah, and every year they take us to this CIA 1 week camp to show us how it works. And Covert says, kind of like a spy camp. And she said, yes. She says, and that we're there, and it's a full week. Sometimes it's 2 weeks. And they bring journalists also. And Covert goes, oh yeah, let's talk. So let's move. Let's talk about. And he changes the subject when she says, wow, there's a 1 week camp, and they bring all of these actors and actresses from Hollywood, and they bring journalists for a 1 week CIA camp. And she starts talking about it, and he stops her. You can find the video. Jimmy Dore did it.
If you can send me that clip, please send it to me. Yeah, these are good articles for Covert Action. That's the kind of stuff we like to try and expose. Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I put it on a video one time, and they immediately on one of my videos, and they demonetized the video immediately. And they put that particular segment in and said, sorry, you can't put that in because that is a copyright violation, right? So it's like, that's weird, because my understanding is the only way you can do a copyright violation is if somebody makes a copyright claim. So I'm supposed to believe that NBC launched a copyright claim because I put 20 seconds in, you know what I mean? No, they didn't want it in there. But the bottom line is, I think it's a good time for us to talk about the Skripals and talk about, oh, by the way, one other thing before we go. I don't know if you've seen it, but one of the things that's coming out now is that when they wrote for Russiagate in January of 2017, they wrote this document that was supposed to tell us how the Russians interfered. And it was supposed to be 17 different agencies, but we found out they only grabbed like 3 or 4 people, and they wrote this document, right? What we recently come out is emails from James Clapper, where he had people from NSA saying, hold it, hold it, hold it. We haven't had enough time to review this stuff. We can't stand behind it. We're not sure if it's true. We need more time to look at it. Clapper then sent an email that said, that's not an option. We got to get behind this. This is a team sport. So Clapper made it clear, we don't care if it's, what are you doing? It's a team sport. So now it's coming out, starting to come out bit by bit. What you and I already knew, that Russiagate was an operation that they pushed to get Trump. Whether you like Trump or not is irrelevant. Have you seen any of the latest Russiagate stuff?
Yes. Well, I reviewed the documents that Tulsi Gabbard released. Did an article about that, and yeah, I mean, they were revealing because, well, firstly, the intelligence agencies themselves only said, "Oh, we have low confidence in this." So that's not proof at all. And in fact, that means they have very limited, confidence that there's any semblance of truth in that. They never had. So that's very significant. That there's no that showed the intelligence agencies themselves never had the proof or firm evidence that Russia interfered in any way, although they presented it very differently to the public. That was the big lie they spread every day, of Russian interference. That was the WMD of the 2020 teens. And another revealing document I saw was one where it was, I think, an intelligence report on what Putin may have known, and it suggested that Putin had gotten. So, well, firstly, the assessment was that Putin's view on the 2016 election, basically, that both candidates sucked from a Russian point of view. And he was like, well, I don't think, U.S.-Russian relations are going to improve under either Trump or Clinton. That was Putin's assessment. So that contradicts the narrative that he was so gung-ho about Trump, who didn't prove to be very good as far as U.S.-Russian relations. He ratcheted up arms sales to Ukraine in his first presidency. I'm just talking about, he sold Ukraine anti-tank weapons that Obama hadn't even sold. And he tore up the internuclear INF treaty. So, and he ratcheted up sanctions on Russia. So Russia didn't get much of an improvement with Trump from Obama. And that was basically Putin's assessment. And the other revealing thing was that Putin had been given some intelligence about Hillary Clinton, that she was, had serious health issues, and that also she had anger management issues, which was no. I studied her career going back to Arkansas and know about that, so I can believe that report. They were reporting this to Putin, and that they even had to give her tranquilizers because she was like behaving on edge and bizarrely. But Putin didn't leak that information. So if he was intent on ruining Clinton, he could have leaked that. I mean, that would have struck a blow against Clinton and their potential mental fitness for office and physical health. But he kept that information. So this contradicts the idea that he interfered in any way. Uh, and the key evidence came from the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity group that's been totally ignored in the mainstream. But this is, as you know many of them well, these are outstanding intelligence professionals who have high integrity and professional standards, unlike the clappers, and are against the politicization of intelligence. And they actually believe, a lot of them believe, that intelligence agencies can make a difference and produce good policy by providing good information, but to presidents and higher level leaders. But you compromise that when you skew the intelligence and politicize that. And they determine, because the key evidence of alleged Russian election interference centered on the claim that the Russians supposedly leaked some emails that showed how Hillary Clinton and the DNC had rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders, and that made them look bad, and they supposedly gave that to WikiLeaks. But the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity carried out a study using computer experts. They hired computer experts who determined, based on the speed of the modem, the documents had to have been leaked from within the United States. It was a leak, not a hack, and it came from the United States. And then Murray, the British ambassador to Uzbekistan, met with somebody who was one of the leakers, and he was American, not Russian. So, and then the head of CrowdStrike was a firm that Clinton had hired. He also said there was no proof of the Russian hacking story. So, I mean, the whole Russiagate narrative, the fraud, and these new documents are just adding more evidence of that. And I think, there was one document that pointed to kind of conspiracy that, I think Obama was ordering, I think Obama gave the order to Clapper to go back. He wasn't happy because the intelligence agency conclusion was like low confidence that the Russians may have done something, but there's no proof. So he's like, make a stronger conclusion or something. I think there's documents, if I'm not mistaken, saying something to that effect. So it's coming from the top level. As bad as the people like Clapper and the CIA and FBI are, we should recognize that they're getting their marching orders from the White House, and that these crimes emanate from the White House and the donor class that puts the Obamas and the Trumps into office. They fund their campaign, the billionaire class, and they're the ones that benefit. And I think the purpose of Russiagate was not really, part of it may have been to undermine Trump, but I think it was to stir up a new anti-Russia fervor and a new Cold War type atmosphere. And also, I think just to create a circus around partisan, like it brings back to the beginning of the show. I think the goal of the ruling oligarchy is divide and conquer, and to pit Americans against each other on partisan lines. So it was useful to paint Trump as a Russian agent. Instead of the Democrats saying, look what Trump is doing to working class America. He's transferring wealth upwards. He's passing regressive tax laws, and he's allowing the wealthy to offshore their money, and he's ramping up the military budget. I mean, those are ground to oppose Trump. But the plutocratic elite actually likes those policies. So they'd rather, liberals, look, he's a Russian agent. And then his defenders, it actually makes Trump more popular, because then Trump says, look, I'm a victim of the deep state. They're trying to bring me down, these bad forces. And it's all the liberal Democrat, Clinton, Obama. as if they're the only bad guys. And so his loyal base gravitate to Trump. He's the hero standing against the deep state, against these evil liberals. And Trump somehow is the savior of America when he's he is a con man who's basically screwing over everybody but the 1%. So
yeah,
that's my take on the whole thing.
Yeah, and here's 3 things people need to know about Russiagate. Number 1, Julian Assange volunteered to talk before Congress. He volunteered to be interviewed by the FBI and James Comey and other people. And Comey and his people expressly said, no, you can't go interview him. Let me add this. The infamous Trump Tower meeting, there was a lawyer there who I interviewed named Natalia Veselnitskaya. She was a lawyer. This was some stuff going on with Bill Browder that she wanted, which would of course, you had the whole Browder and the Magnitsky Act stuff going on. She was involved in a lawsuit with a company involving Browder. And so she wanted to pass this stuff on to the Trump team. Didn't work out well. She volunteered to go to Congress and give them everything she had. Nope, can't do it. One other guy, Andrei Telezhenko, whistleblower, worked with the U.S. Government at the highest levels. He worked with Blue Star Strategies. He worked with the Biden team. He worked with all of these people. He was a member of the Ukrainian government, right? He became a dissident. He fled Ukraine. He volunteered. He says, I want to go before Congress and tell them everything I know. Mitt Romney and someone else said he's a Russian agent. He has to be forbidden from coming to Congress because he wants to spread Russian propaganda. 3 people, all who were in so-called controversial positions, every one of them said, I want to go before Congress or before whoever and talk. And they said, nah, we're not interviewing them. Again, as a former investigator, I can't imagine that I would have an investigator who worked for me and someone who had some access to a crime that we were looking into would say, we'd like to come talk to you and tell you everything we know. And then we would say, nah, we can't trust that guy. Even if we couldn't trust him, I'd interview him anyway. And that way I could take everything that I had and I may find something just from the interview. Oh, well, isn't it interesting? He said this, he was trying to cover up that. He said that. Oh, he pointed us to this. Oh, I could take the things that I had from him, whether I trusted it or not, and compare them to other things and say, isn't it interesting? He said that. Look, I got 4 other witnesses that said this. I would always want to interview him. Why would I ever say, I don't want to interview a person who is right in the center of controversy of something I'm looking into? 3 people who all volunteered to go before Congress and talk. That's all you need to know about Russiagate, isn't it, Jeremy?
Absolutely, yeah. The whole thing smells bad.
Yes. Once again, we've been talking with Jeremy Kuzmarov. He is the editor at CovertActionMagazine.com. A fantastic exposing covert action since 1978. Don't forget, they got series on 9/11, Biden, feature, Israel, Gaza, political assassinations, war in Ukraine, prison industrial complex. They got all of these series that you can go into. 9/11, how about that? A lot of articles. They got videos over here. They got for the YouTube channel, regions, which region, you name it. They got lots of information. It's one of my favorite websites. That's it. It's CovertActionMagazine.com. And Jeremy does an outstanding job. Jeremy's got books and he's been involved in a lot of books. So you can look him up online. You can find him on Amazon at some of the books he's been involved with and written. Jeremy, thank you very much and look forward to talking again soon.
My pleasure. Great conversation as usual.
Always, man. It's funny because this has been one of my areas, man. I love investigating this stuff and reading up on this stuff. As you can tell, I know what the hell I'm talking about. Everyone, let me just ask you this. If you can, PayPal, Patreon, buy me a coffee. It'd be great if you can contribute to the channel, Cash App, whatever the case may be. But even if you can't, you can, in fact, share this on all your social media platforms and make sure everybody gets to hear this important information. Thanks a lot, you all. We're out.